Hello and welcome to the Jane Austen Literacy Foundation. My name is Caroline Jane Knight and I'm the founder and chair of the foundation. I'm also Jane's fifth great niece and the last of Jane Austen's nieces to have grown up at Chawton House in the south of England on my family's ancestral estate where great aunt Jane herself lived and wrote. I'm absolutely thrilled to be joined today by Justin Young, the lead writer and executive producer of Sanditon seasons 2 and 3. Welcome, Justin. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Caroline. It's lovely to be here.
Now, we're obviously only days away from the release of Sanditon season 2, a much anticipated series. How are you feeling? I mean, what's going on for you this close to, as I said, the release of something like this?
Do you know, it's really extraordinary. I think we've been on such a roller coaster with this show. You know, we put our heart and soul into series 1, and it was so disappointing that when it certainly in the UK, it didn't quite get the audience we'd hoped for initially. And then we were told it wasn't coming back. And we really, we were really devastated by that. We had such a kind of plan that we were going to do across several seasons. So initially there was that huge disappointment that it wasn't coming back. Then there was this groundswell of support from the fans online that grew and grew, that was so wonderful. And when it aired internationally, it developed this momentum, and the American audience and the Australian audience, people from all over, India, Sweden, all of these online fans just gave us such lovely validation and support. So pretty soon after it aired in America, we started talking about season 2. And then it took a while to get the funding and everything else. So it's been a real roller coaster, as I say. And when we finally got the green light, December 2020, it was unbelievable. I think right up until that moment, we weren't sure it was coming back, and they commissioned 2 seasons back to back. And we then made them incredibly quickly. You know, from the moment of the green light to the moment where we wrapped filming was less than a year to develop, write, produce 2 seasons. So the other strange thing is that because we made it in a pandemic, I basically didn't leave this room for the duration of the process. I got to visit set once, which is very unusual. So in a way, it feels like we made this thing in our rooms, in our spare rooms, which is the weird thing about it. I have colleagues I worked with for a year that I've never met in the flesh. We've only met like this. And so it sort of felt like a little thing we were just doing between us. We were making this nice little thing. And then there comes a point where you've got to let it go. You know, it's like the first day you take your children to kindergarten and you got to wave them off and you go, oh my goodness, we're letting them go now. And so I'm apprehensive because as I say, it does feel like this little thing we've had and we're letting it go. I'm excited to share it with people because I really hope that people can see how much love we put into season 2. And I really feel that it's a continuation of series 1, but I also feel we've enriched it, and I feel it's deeper and it's wider, and I hope that if you like season 1, you'll really, really love season 2. So I'm excited to share it with everybody, and I'm apprehensive, and I can't quite believe, as I say, because it's been so quick, so fast, I can't quite believe that 15 months after Masterpiece said yes, we're ready to show it to people. I can't tell you in TV terms, that is so much faster than anything I've ever made. It's incredible, but I'm excited.
And also in such peculiar circumstances. And I know that your role in Sanditon season 2 is slightly different from season 1. So yes, so this time you're obviously lead writer and executive producer. How's your role changed?
My role's changed. Season 1 was very interesting because Andrew Davies wrote the first episode before it had got greenlit. And obviously Andrew is the master. He more or less invented the TV adaptation of the period drama as we know it, you know. And so he'd written this first episode, and then I came on board as, I think I was series consultant. And so my job was really to use Andrew's first episode as a springboard to develop the other stories with Andrew, with Belinda, our executive producer, and with the team. And so I was sort of responsible with the team for building those next 7 episodes off the back of that. And obviously, Andrew worked very closely with me, and we developed them. And then we sort of divided the episodes between us. So Andrew wrote half of them, I wrote half of them, and a brilliant writer called Andrea Gibb wrote the cricket episode of season 1. So I felt very invested in it. You know, I was kind of, certainly in terms of the characters and developing the characters, I was lucky enough to write some of the key episodes, certainly for Sydney and Charlotte. And then when series 2 was mooted, before we knew we were going to be crazy enough to make 2 and 3 simultaneously, Belinda Campbell, our executive producer, said, would I like to properly showrun the next series? So really that meant that when Masterpiece first approached us, the question was, what stories could I come up with for them to pitch to them? And then from the moment we got the green light, well, we got the green light on the back of the stories I developed for series 2 and 3. And really, and I want to give absolute credit to my collaborators, the other writers, and the story producer and the series producer, but ultimately, the stories, what came out of my brain. So the overall shape of all the stories for series 2 and series 3 were from me, and the vision and the pitch. And then once we were developing the scripts, you know, each writer had their episode, but at the same time, they were working to a blueprint to the overall story shape that I'd written. And I would be working with them on every scene of every episode. So I think I feel, for better or worse, and as I say, I hope people like it, I feel far more sense of ownership of series 2 and 3. I really feel that, you know, this is my vision for the show. Certainly in terms of the stories, obviously we have wonderful directors and designers, and it's their vision as well. But the stories this time around, and Andrew has been a fantastic support. He wrote episode 6 of series 2, and he's, you know, everything has been passed by him. He was wonderful to give advice, but really I feel this time around that these are my stories. So, you know, if people are going to hate the series, it's my fault.
So even more terrifying, as you said, is
even more terrifying. Exactly. It's all on me.
And I mean, in the pandemic, as you say, when you've been locked in, not literally locked in your bedroom, but you know what I mean, as you said, locked in a spare room for so long, how has that changed the collaboration process? I mean, you're the lead writer, but how have you worked with those other writers and got their collaboration?
It's been very strange because I mean, it's funny because in Britain, with exceptions, we don't really run writers' rooms in the way that they work in American shows. On an American show, I'm not sure how it is in Australia, you would have, you know, you'd all be in the room together for months, and you would work very collaboratively. The model in British television is quite different, which is writers still tend to work in isolation. So in that respect, it was different in some ways and not different at all in others. So as I say, we started off, I wrote the kind of story document, the Bible. And so each episode, you'd have sort of 3-4 pages saying, these are the main story beats. And then we would work with the individual episode writer to flesh that out. Ordinarily, that would involve, you know, you'd be in a room with a whiteboard and lots and lots of coffee and sandwiches, and it would all be face to face. And I really missed that. It meant that the brainstorming was all done like this. And there were times when we were developing the stories where we would all get on a Zoom, all the writers together, to kind of fix story problems, or just to make sure we were all making the same show. Because of course, series 1, it was really, as I say, me and Andrew and then Andrea. Whereas opening it up to other writers, the challenge was how to make each episode feel like it had the same voice. And particularly when we were introducing new characters, how to communicate to all of the other writers who these characters were and how they thought and how they talked, and making sure it was the same across the process. So with all of my collaborators, and I worked very closely with Rebecca Headley, our series producer, and we had Jennifer McConnell was our story producer, and a wonderful team, but it was all like this. So in some ways, there was a weird intimacy to that, because you're talking to each other from your homes, which is a strange thing. I don't know if you found that, you know, I think the whole world has learned how to Zoom. But, you know, working in an office together is neutral territory. It's Switzerland. But when you're talking to each other from your own homes, that fosters a weird kind of intimacy about the process, strangely, even though you're remote. So it was a weird mixture of things of, as I say, not even meeting in person some of these collaborators. And I'm hoping I'll get to meet some of them at the screening we're having here in a few weeks' time. But also, as I say, this weird intimacy of all being in each other's offices or spare rooms together. So it was strange. And I think what I really missed was, because of COVID protocols, also because of the timetable, I really missed being more present once filming started up. I would have loved to be there, you know, most days. So in terms of communicating with the actors, that was all like this, or on, you know, WhatsApp. There was a lot of WhatsApp backwards and forwardsing. So I missed the in-person stuff, but I also think it was a phenomenal achievement from everybody that we made these two series in COVID times, you know, and we pulled it off. So yeah, it was very different in some respects, and I think in other ways it eliminated distractions. Probably given the size of my workload, there were times when it was quite a relief that I couldn't go out. I had no choice, you know. I was locked in, and that was that, like everybody else.
Yes, absolutely. Now, I have to ask on behalf of the
Yes.
Austen online community, who I have asked what they'd like me to ask you. And I'm sure it won't be of a huge surprise that there are a lot of questions about Theo.
Yes, of course.
And obviously the effects of his departure. Now, the first thing I would like to say from the community is thank you for making it happen. Everyone is absolutely thrilled that Sanditon
Well,
didn't
thanks to them. Thanks for them for helping bring it back as well.
Absolutely was. As I said, yes, I think it's been a good collaboration then, because as I said, people
right,
are absolutely delighted and can't wait. And I can't wait to see it myself. But once you knew that Theo wasn't coming back, what drove the decision to write that character out, or not recast, as opposed to recast?
Right.
I know you've done with some other characters.
Yes, well, it was very interesting because once, as I say, the discussions for series 2 were ongoing pretty much from the moment it went out in the States. So it took a while, but obviously a certain amount of time went by, and we weren't sure, you know, which actors would be available to come back. So our first job really, when we moved to bringing it back, was to see who was available. And that meant going to Theo and going to Rose and going to Crystal. Rose plays Charlotte, Crystal who plays Georgiana. And, you know, really they were our kind of tentpole characters, and everyone else around them we were hoping would come back because it's an ensemble show. And so my first job was to write a storyline for series 2 and 3 for Sidney, and to go to him and say, you know, here's the idea. We knew he wasn't certain, but we thought, well, we've got to throw everything we can at it. So I wrote a version, which was the Sidney story for season 2 and 3. And we went to him and we had very friendly, civilized discussions. But ultimately, I think, you know, Theo felt he'd told that story. And for us, the end point of season 1 was always, it wasn't the end of the story, it was the halfway point. But I think he felt the time had elapsed, and he quite liked that broken fairy tale, was what he called it. And so very amicably, he decided to go off and do other things. We realized the show wasn't continuing without him. And honestly, at that moment, I thought that was it. I thought, well, we gave it our best shot, and there's no way we can bring it back without him. And to their enormous credit, Masterpiece, who are making these seasons, they said, well, does that need to be the end? You've got all of these other wonderful characters. You've got Charlotte, you've got Esther, you've got Tom Parker, Arthur Parker. We don't think the story's over for these other characters. So are we sure we want to throw everything out just because Theo's not coming back? So as you say, as you ask, we discussed a recast. Of course we did. We said, is there any way we could recast this character? And honestly, I think it became apparent very, very quickly that that would not be a good idea. Because first of all, Theo and Rose had such a specific chemistry. You can't hope to replicate that. You can't hope to bring in another actor and say, hey, look, everybody, he looks completely different, but go, chemistry. It just doesn't work like that. You know, we cast Theo and Rose very particularly because of the way they struck sparks off each other. And I think even the audience members, and I get hourly abuse on Twitter from people who will never forgive me for not bringing back Sidney. But I really feel that if we'd gone in episode 1, right, we pick up where we left off, here is new Sidney, the audience would have hated him. Whoever he was, the audience would have hated the actor from the get-go. It would have pulled them out of the story because they would have gone, well, hang on, you're not Sidney, you're not the man we fell in love with across 8 episodes, you're somebody different. And I honestly think we would have found it a challenge to find an actor willing to take that job. Because if you're an actor, why, oh, why would you want to step into the shoes of somebody who's created such an iconic character? So for all of those reasons, we thought, well, that's not really going to work. And personally, you know, we invested so much as program makers in Sidney Theo version of Sidney, it would have felt really bizarre to us. Sidney is so real to us. The thought of him coming back with a different face, it's like, you know, it's like your wife or your child coming back with a different face. It would have been really, really weird. So then the question became, okay, if Sidney isn't in the series, how do we carry on? What's the story? And we know that audiences are very canny. They're very narrative literate. And unless you can say at the very, very beginning of the very first episode, we are drawing a line under Sidney and Charlotte, there's no continuation. They're then going to spend the next 2 seasons going, any minute now, he's walking through the door. Even now, I see people online going, oh, at the end of series 3, he's going to enter. And they're not going to be able to invest in any new narratives. There's going to be no stakes or no jeopardy for Charlotte, who is our priority, because they're going to go, oh, well, whatever they're telling us, Sidney's coming back at the end of season 3. And so really, then it became a no-brainer that we, and also, we didn't want to undermine their love story. Having spent 8 episodes building this love story very carefully, we thought any ambiguity or anything that suggests to the audience, actually, we asked you to invest in that, but it's fine, let's all move on, really insults the audience and insults the story. So we needed a solution that said, yes, Charlotte and Sidney were in love, and it's heartbreaking they can't be together. And Charlotte's still heartbroken, and let's go through that with her. Let's honor the character's emotions. And then it became just the narrative logic of that meant that in the opening minutes of episode 1 of season 2, Sidney is out of the story and we move on. And it's heartbreaking. And that's what season 2 is about. Season 2 is about how Charlotte recovers from Sidney. And as soon as we made that decision, season 2 opened up to us. And it became, I think, a really much deeper show and much less predictable. And actually, it was a gift as storytellers, because ordinarily, that narrative is so familiar, you know, everybody knows where it's going. They're going, well, we know this story. We know how there's going to be some obstacles, and then Sidney and Charlotte are going to get together. And honestly, I'd love to tell you, I was brave enough as a writer to have gone, yeah, no, let's split them up. In a million years, that's not where I would have gone with it. But being forced to make that decision, suddenly you go, well, anything can happen now. And the audience have no idea what's going to happen, because this can go in any number of directions. And broken-hearted Charlotte is a much more interesting character. Cynical Charlotte, bruised Charlotte, Charlotte who says, I'm never going to love again. I don't want to marry now because of this experience. You know, then you're into something that's got the kind of mature, richer quality of a Persuasion, as opposed to, you know, the kind of wide-eyed Emma narrative. And I hope the audience will agree. I know there are some people we will never convince that we shouldn't have just recast Sidney, but I think the series is much better because of it. We could have told an equally good version with Sidney and Theo, probably, but personally, I think it was a blessing in disguise.
Interesting. And I think you're absolutely right that, I mean, there is so much interest in how this story is going to be told, what's going to happen next. And as you said, usually we don't actually have that amount of, you know, right, intrigue and question actually about what's going to happen in you know, the continuation of Austen's story. You're absolutely right. It has created much more, yes, anticipation about how you're going to manage that and how the story is going to be told. And when you're writing something like this, how conscious are you that obviously you are continuing works of Jane Austen and her characters? I mean, right, how conscious are you of that?
Very conscious. It's a funny balance, because I think I think Jane Austen I know Jane Austen is one of the great novelists of all time. So it would be a fool's errand to think, it would be an act of unbelievable hubris to go, yeah, we're just gonna, you know, carry on writing in the style and of this, the one of the greatest novelists of all time. It would be insane. It would be like trying to, you know, finish a Shakespeare play. But so I think we tried to be very faithful to her world. We had a fantastic Paula Byrne, a fantastic Austen expert, on our team. And, you know, Paula read every script and every storyline, and she would say to us, and often she would be suggesting things. She would say, oh, did you know Austen thought this? Or did you know Austen wrote this? And she would make sure that there's a kind of smell test. You know, you can tell when something, it just feels off. The other thing, of course, is that Sanditon, we have no idea. We can only speculate what Sanditon was going to be and where it was going to go, because there's so little of it. It's such a fragment, you know. You barely even meet Sidney. Sidney appears at the very end of the fragment, and you have no idea where that was going to go. So in a way, it felt like a departure. Some people say that the sense they have is that Sanditon was going to almost felt more Dickensian in its flavor and its tone and its characterization. So we are very conscious of the precedents. When we were stuck for characters or stories, we would always go back to the source. We would always go back to Austen, and we'd look at all of her characters. We didn't want to do, as I said, we didn't want to do anything too predictable. So the new characters that we brought in, instinctively you want them to feel like Austen characters, but you don't want the audience to go, oh, well, that's just Willoughby, or oh, that's just
Mrs.
Edward
Norris,
Ferrars.
or that's, yes.
Exactly, or that's Darcy. We didn't want to imitate any of those characters, but we wanted them to feel they had an Austen DNA. So all of them pick up certain elements, and there are things that we picked up on from her work and from her life. You know, I've said this before, but if you look at what happened to Cassandra Austen and her life and her engagement, and that certainly feeds into the Charlotte Sidney narrative. And the fact that in season 2, Charlotte becomes a governess, you know, that was certainly there. You look at Mrs. Weston, who was Anne Taylor in Emma, who is a surrogate mother to Emma, and you know, Jane Fairfax, who's threatened this terrible idea, or maybe she'll become a governess. You know, this is all stuff that we carefully picked up from her world. And similarly, the advent of the soldiers. You know, the soldiers are so present throughout all of her novels. So we were very mindful of being respectful to her legacy, to making sure that everything felt plausibly of her world, that it didn't jar. But really, our priority was just making sure that we were led by the characters. You know, we're very character driven. It was like, what's Charlotte's narrative now? What's Esther's story? And what do the characters tell us they need to do? So it was really about that. And based on what those characters needed, well, that suggests, let's create these other characters. And what might Jane have done with these characters? And what might she have wanted to say here? And, you know, we're making the show in 2021. So we've got the benefit of, for example, with Georgiana's story, we have a appreciation of the context for slavery and England's history of that. And we had Black history experts come in to help us really flesh that out. And it was very bold of Jane to create a character, a woman of color, in her novel at that point. But of course, we had the advantage that we had, you know, people of color on our writing team and advising us, who were able to write Georgiana's story from a perspective of being a Black person, which is very different to writing it from a white perspective. So hopefully that brought a truth and authenticity to that story. So that's a very long-winded answer to your question.
No, it's fascinating. I mean, it is fascinating how, I mean, as I said, I think with all of the controversy that there's been around the series, obviously it is an Austen, a continuation of a continuation. You know, it is it's fascinating. It really is fascinating how you've gone about it. It really is.
But it's you know, we make a point of saying season 2 is inspired by Austen. It's not, you know, we're respectful, but at the same time we're not trying to do anything definitive. We're not saying we are trying to create the definitive end to her novel. We're not that arrogant. We're saying she's a genius. We are very lucky to ride on her coattails, and we you know, we've been inspired by her to imagine where the story could go.
And talking of endings, I have to ask, are we going to see a happy ending for Charlotte in the end?
I don't want to give any spoilers, obviously, but I think of personally, and who's to say if there might be a season 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, but in my mind, I like to imagine that seasons 1, 2, and 3 are the novel. They are the hypothetical Sanditon novel. That's in my mind. These 3 series are the Sanditon trilogy, and you get a resolution to Charlotte's story at the end of season 3. And I think and hope the audience can trust us that ultimately they will feel satisfied by how things end.
Excellent.
For all of our characters.
Good. Well, I really look forward to it. As I said, I can't wait to see it. I'm very much looking forward to it.
Oh,
thank you so much.
I really hope you like it.
and for talking to me today. It's been lovely to speak to you. Thank you very, very much, Justin.
You too, Caroline. Thank you very much.
I hope it goes really well. Hope it's well received.
Thank you. Thank you.
Right, I'll stop recording.
Okay.